Hey, welcome everybody as you're joining. Just give a second to let everybody get fully connected and just about ready to get going. Yep. Well, welcome everyone. There might be a few more just coming in, but my name is John Krupsak. I'm a professor at Hope College and also formerly the lead program director on the STEM program at the National Science Foundation. Currently a member of the CCSN Community College STEM Network. I wanted to welcome everyone to the first installment of this year's Research to Practice clinics. And I want to quickly introduce some of our co-workers, collaborators here at the CCSN. So first, Melissa Qual, who you hopefully have gotten some emails from. So Melissa is running the show for us, managing the the logistics aspects of the research to practice clinics. And Melissa, a member of the CCSN Community College STEM Network. And what I'd like to do is suggest that while we're getting going, if you could put your name and where you're from, including like the city and state in the chat, so that everyone can get a chance to see where people are coming from, just the range of institutions. Really excited to see the variety of different participants we have. So as you know, the research to practice clinics are meant to bridge the gap between what the research is saying about particular issues of interest and how those things might be able to be implemented or influence the day-to-day practice of practitioners working face-to-face with students. So today, our first research practice clinics of this season is going to be conducted by Maria Espino, who is a co-PI of the CCSN network project. And Maria is going to tell you a little bit more about herself, her interests, and take it from there. So take it away, Maria.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, good morning. I am excited to be here at my second time going around for the Research to Practice clinics. I'm really excited to be here talking about mentoring, and in this time around, we get to talk a little bit more about a case study that you all have been able to see beforehand, and one of the pre-reads. So I'm excited to bring that into the conversation as we center understanding mentoring and these STEM students, especially for community colleges. So today we're going to be, I'm going to be presenting on embedding intentional mentoring for community college students, community college STEM students, moving from transactional advising into identity affirming ecosystems. So one of the bigger conversations that we tend to have with the literature and really understanding students in these different areas is really understanding how the community college um, is of service and serves students in particular ways. One of the bigger conversations in literature and that we're trying to understand as you all are seeing the pre-reads that we had for today is really understanding that sense of belonging, sense of self-efficacy, mentoring aspects of things. So what exactly does that look like on the opposite end, right? So we look at how ultimately students are feeling isolated, are having these complex ideologies and feeling Thanks so much. Um, that is really hard for students to really become their full authentic selves in these areas, which leads to them feeling isolated in the community college space, right? So students tend to carry various complex financial constraints, family responsibilities, and overall not really understanding how to navigate the institutional culture at a community college, which in these different areas, we tend to use more traditional interventions to really get to the root of their academic success. So we use tutoring, we look at how to connect them with advising without really understanding or paying tribute to that really important piece of feeling like they're belonging or that sense of belonging that can be a root cause in this conversation. So when we pivot that conversation and really focus on the mentoring piece and that sense of belonging piece, these areas or these institutions like the community college space moves from that transactional piece into a more ecosystem implemented sense of belonging space where students start to become pieces of that fabric of the community college, where students are able to push beyond that barrier of feeling by themselves, but instead have this web of people who are there to support themselves, to be able to feel supported by others, and that the institution themselves really cares for them. And mentoring is one of those key points that really transcends that conversation and transcends those changes that happen um, for community college students in STEM. So the first piece that I wanted to bring into really implementing that theory to practice piece was the white paper on the Holyoke Community College and the work that we did with them. So I was one of the researchers that was involved in this co-partnership with Holyoke and understanding what is happening at Holyoke and how are you all supporting and elevating community STEM community college students. So in Holyoke Community College, they created and pretty much implemented this seminar. It's a 1 credit semester long seminar exclusively for students who were in this STEM program and STEM who are STEM scholars. But the way that they ended up using the theory to practice piece of this was really being intentional in the ways that they embed culturally responsive spaces. They embed frameworks like community culture wealth that are not necessarily something you see in other STEM courses or in other courses at the community college. So their explicit integration of these frameworks really was a profound impact in the way that that seminar was created. Another piece was the mentorship and leadership area of it. Were intentional in bringing in faculty and bringing into industry representatives that focused on that peer-to-peer and that peer to industry mentorship that provided the support, the validation, and the foreseeing of being able to be in those different roles. And lastly, it was really focused on academic enrichment. How are students that are in this program or in this seminar able to actually get agency, have an input in what that class looks like, and how their workshops really made an effort to do what they want to do or what they were interested in doing that ultimately elevated their experience as STEM students. So having this dedicated space to engage with STEM students through this lens, really acknowledge that their experiences weren't mattered, that their lived experiences is something of value that allowed them to propel and feel a little bit more had agency and ownership of their actual development in their curriculum in their program. So some of these areas may be new to folks. So one of the big things that we talked about, especially in the frameworks with the Holyoke piece, was CRP and CCW. So what are these things and kind of how did they fuel that engine for Holyoke? So on the left side, you'll see culturally relevant pedagogy or CRP. This is an approach to affirm students' cultural identities, promote critical social awareness, alongside and with the advancement of academic success. So a lot of the stuff in practice that you see in the literature, or the avenues of practice that you see in the literature, focuses on how to give active dialogues and how to move away from what currently is like the status quo, but also in bringing people's communities, lives, futures into the conversation and understanding how that is in essence an asset for the navigation of the communities or the navigation of their lived experiences in a STEM field in this scenario. And then the other one that also was implemented in Holyoke was the community culture wealth model, which is a framework that focuses on various types of capital, but mostly with recognizing like the identities of historically marginalized students that carry that rich social, navigational, familial resistance, um, linguistic types of capital into these different academic spaces. And as you navigate those different various capitals, there is an outcome that leads to understanding and making meaning of this area. So an application for CCW is really helping students come into this identity, come into understanding the assets of their lived experience, while being able to acknowledge that they're in these academic spaces and are thriving because of those assets versus um, in spite of those assets or using that deficit perspective of their lived experiences. And when we bring these two together and how Holyoke has done it, This leads to a development of self-efficacy, STEM identity formation, and sense of belonging at Holyoke and in the community college space for them. So how is this even brought in even more in the particular Holyoke case? Here's how it was in the classroom, right? So this are the different types of aspects and items that they actually did in the classroom, right? So the student was able to partake in the CCW wheel, which is the Community Culture Wealth Wheel, where they connected, they used this activity to connect themselves with their personal background and then ultimately connect to the wheel and into their STEM identity. So how their community culture or how their lived experience is really navigating in these different areas with their personal backgrounds being in the center. Additionally, in the same conversation, they led peer discussions, right? So they moved away from the traditional ways of learning that they are being lectured at, but they also became the lecturers, being able to have those student-driven dialogues, being able to look at current events and how those different events affect the way that they navigate it and or experience being in this field, right? In this seminar. They also were able to learn from diverse guests, being able to be exposed to various STEM industries in academia that allowed them to show the various definitions of what it looked like to be a STEM professional. It wasn't just one cookie cutter that this is what you have to be a STEM professional. This gave the students the opportunity to see people from all walks of life, to be able to know what it looks like to be in X industry and have X lived experience and look like XYZ, to be able to understand what that diverse guest um, ideology was, what that field was, and it just really brought some representation into the conversation. And lastly was the community culture STEM narrative, which was pretty much a culmination presentation that talked about how their personal identities and their STEM identity pretty much becomes a pathway and or becomes a lived experience all in one to be able to ultimately lead with how that looked like, what that's going to look like moving forward for them as future STEM scholars or STEM leaders in their fields. So this is just a little bit of what that kind of looked like in the response in the actual classroom for the seminar. So when we also look at the community, the cultural wealth aspect of pieces, so this is where a little bit of the data came in from from the piece that we talked about in this, or the pre-read we had for the Holyoke piece, was reframing identity through cultural wealth. So we saw three major areas, recognizing their assets, really conceptualizing science and knowing what that looks like for themselves, and really dismantling that deficit perspective that is very inherent in traditional sense in STEM education. So for Jim, one of the avenues that came up was the community culture wealth was very expansive. It helped me put it in a structure. I do not have a lot of navigational capital because I advocate for myself a lot. I do have a lot of navigational capital because I advocate for myself a lot. So in this scenario for Jim, Jim was able to use what the experience of what community culture wealth was to be able to understand and identify, okay, I have this, to be able to self-recognize and be able to self advocate, to be able to understand and navigate the space that they were talking about, especially in this class, like how that particular theory was being able to be implemented and being able to be talked about directly using the language of the theory that became that active tool in the course. For Bobby's scenario, quote, Bobby really talked about how they felt that they were having this real life conversation with themselves and thinking about what could happen in the future as they become a STEM person in the future and or developing that STEM space. So Bobby mentioned, we're talking about current events, how it affects our lives, how it affects the future. I really like those discussions. So again, bringing the facts that are currently living into how that's going to look and apply in the real world for them. That's something that Bobby in this scenario really starts to reflect on actively through the conversation of understanding what they're doing, how they're doing, what type of understanding is actually happening that allows students to really reflect and continue to have that conversation with them themselves and how it's going to attribute to the future. And lastly, Dolores shares, talking about how there's no such thing as being naturally good at anything versus if you're interested enough, you can do anything. So this is one of the central pieces that I know for me, I reflected a lot on this, on Dolores's experiences because it was dismantling that deficit, that if you're not a naturally good person at math or naturally good person at science, you tend to not see a lot of people wanting to go into the STEM field and challenge that not being naturally talented conversation of what it looks like to be a STEM student or what it is to be a successful STEM student. So for Dolores, being able to challenge that myth, being able to really understand that even though I'm doing this, I'm developing these tools myself to be able to be good at this area. I don't have to come naturally. It's something that I can practice and get good at as I progress through this, which also build Dolores' STEM identity in that process. So in that same shift and conversation, as Dolores kind of set us up for, and looking at when we think about mentorship and what an ecosystem of mentorship looks like, we tend to see how mentoring tends to be we pour into, we get this output. And in reality, it's more of an ecosystem. It is a bigger shift in the ways that everything interacts with each other. One interaction leads to the next, that leads to the next, that eventually creates this intentional ecosystem. So, as we have the conversation today, I want us to really focus on how we are working with our students, how we are going to be practicing and navigating what mentorship looks like or doesn't on our campus, and how we can potentially have opportunities of shifting or opportunities of growth in our different areas. So when we're redefining mentorship, when we're looking at the view of the student, right? In traditional mentorship aspects, we see focus on what do students need? What is that focus on the lack? What are resources and preparations the students don't have, right? So that deficit lens in this first not column, row, in this first row. Um, so the deficit lens. So what can we make better? What do the student lack? What are resources to make them better, right? And in a new intentional paradigm of mentorship, we look at it in that community culture Walter asset lens, right? So we focus on what resilience capitals do students have? What are they bringing to the table that we can maximize their potentiality to come in and feel a sense of belonging, to grow self-efficacy, to develop their STEM identity a little bit more and focus more intently on, okay, this student is a very strong advocate in class. They really like to talk and really to provide a space for themselves. Let's focus on how we can channel this energy elsewhere with a research project that they can lead or have a presentation that they can have since they do like to be able to have that strength and be able to share that strength in that different way and through these mentorship opportunities as an example. In the second row, looking at the primary goals of what mentorship looks like, right? So we tend to see um, students really trying to comply if mentorship is required for for them to be in a course or to be in at a program like a trio program or something like that. There can be some type of oh that transactional piece of oh we have to be here so I can stay on a scholarship or we have to be here so I can do this. Um, and then in some places that um, that can sometimes affect the negative relationship that they have to either the program or to um, the opportunity that is put into them where it's required versus again that holistic look, right? So being able to intentionally shift it a little bit more on like, oh look, this is what we can do to focus on the long-term professional development, right? So looking at professional self-efficacy, looking at their holistic STEM identity development for them to feel comfortable as STEM scholars, etc. And then the third role looks at that pedagogical approach, right? So usually we say the mentor, you kind of have to look up to the mentor, right? There's a one directive knowledge that you're getting poured into from your mentor. They're the knowers of all, etc. So when we shift that conversation, kind of that space, we want to co-construct conversations. We want to co-create areas. We want to co-collaborate together. And being intentional with CRP in this space to be able to really have that dialogue, be co-constructive in learning, to be a partner, right? So they are partners together doing this work versus you pouring into me and it only kind of coming down to me and not being able to have that reciprocal relationship in that mentorship space. And lastly, having a desired outcome. Like I'm going to do this mentor and I'm in this mentoring program and then I get my scholarship, or I'm in this mentoring program and I get to say that I finished this mentoring thing and I get to sign this off on a piece of paper so I can move forward. Um, And in this intentional ecosystem redefining, it's really finding that synergy and integration that students have with someone in the broader STEM community. We want something to be more of with roots, more organic, more um, inherently, if the other areas are being filled organically, it will stem into this broader, more intentional space where students feel that this relationship is an authentic relationship, that they have someone to really lean back on, right? We want this person to be able to have a mentor that they can reach out to for any other help outside of the said outcome or desired outcome, whether it's finishing, being successful in a class, finishing an internship, and then never talking to them again because they got to check that box. But being very intentional in the way that this person or this mentoring experience will become part of their navigational and development as STEM professionals in the community college space. And this kind of leads us to the toolkit piece that I wrote with understanding various different ways that can be adaptable models that we see in community colleges or that you all currently use in your community college, right? So there's five various models that I brought up with STEM e-learning, really understanding how we can use the e-mentoring or e-learning space to incorporate and call students in, even if we aren't physically there, right? It's very good for students with disabilities or high flexibility needs, especially for students who have families or are low income and have multiple jobs, things like that that are very important to still be able to benefit from a service like mentoring, an opportunity like mentoring. Then second was the research mentoring. So having that hands-on hypothesis data, skills to be able to learn from. And this for students who may be interested in becoming researchers in the future, might be our peers in the co-creation pipeline of being in something like ERC, to want to do this work in alignment. Potentially someone that wants to go into a 4 year, so get ready for preparation to transfer. All of these different areas that research one may be a little bit more attractive to folks or more needed for folks, depending on your community college. Economically or disadvantaged slash rural, it really connects with students who need that industry support and or internships, especially for under-resourced areas or regional campuses. We see this a lot in rural community colleges, that sometimes it's just really hard to get pull-in or buy-in from industry leaders. So something to be very intentional is finding different ways to do so. So being able to connect with industries that are nearby, or being able to connect with this kind of goes hand in hand with like the e-mentoring piece with other community colleges that may want to partner with you to be able to create an intentional program to open those doors more intentionally on the back end versus on the student end. Um, Guided mentorship, again, that's the baseline support to be able to have broad implementation, have a set curriculum. Guided mentorship is also something very similar to what we saw in Holyoke, where they had that in the seminar and had that intentional piece that was embedded directly into that curriculum. And then lastly, a social community mentorship. It's just having that facilitated space. It's really good, especially for peer faculty networks, especially when we look at students of racially minoritized or systematically excluded who are looking for belonging, to have this intentional smaller space for these areas. So I know I've done a lot of talking and I see a lot of messages in the chat that I cannot look at the moment, but I do want to have this facilitation breakout session for us and kind of talk through the mentorship match, right? So aligning how STEM student success with the institutions you're at and what the capacity looks like for us. So with the five models of mentorship, and all the information I just mentioned, right? I know it was a lot of talking, but I want to provide this space to be intentional. I'm trying to see how many folks of us are actually in here. So we have about 22 folks on the call, it looks like. So I think it'd be good. I can split it up let's see if I can do, if it lets me do the breakout rooms. Yes, it does. I'm going to do, let's do, we'll do 5 breakout rooms and I'll open them shortly. But essentially, we're going to go over, just discuss with your group how these models are currently implemented on your campus, or if they're not. And if they're not, what would you like to see, right? So based on the readings we've had, which model is currently missing? What are the barriers that are in there to implementing it? Um, And what else do y'all want to see in your campus as you all are gaining all this great information today? So I am going to, we'll have about 15 minutes for you all to meet up in the conversations. I'll put a timer in here so I don't lose lack of time as well myself. I'll do 13 minutes on here and then we can come back and I get to hear from you all.
So, Maria, if you don't mind, can you, like, when we come back, give more information about the guided mentorship? I just like we need to more understanding about it from my side.
Yeah, of course. I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Yes. I know we were 22, so let's see if anyone. Okay, I think everyone should be back. Okay. Let's see. Okay, perfect. I figured out how I can see y'all now. I'm so happy my computer was acting a little funny before we went into the breakout rooms. Thank you all so much for partaking in that conversation. I did have a question that arose as a conversation a little bit more on guided mentorship and what that looked like. So before we get into the discussion, just wanted to add a little bit more preface onto that. So guided mentorship tends to be the example that I mentioned with Holyoke, right? So Holyoke in its seminar class, it has intentional embedded mentorship in the program itself where they're able to have that relationship with a faculty member and with the peers if they choose to. So that's a big example of what that looks like when it's embedded in either a one credit seminar that you could potentially do if you have if you apply for grants and stuff like that. Um, I know for me, one of the main things that popped in my mind when I was doing this work was I'm a McNair scholar. So inherently, McNair itself has that embedded guided mentorship piece where you look for a faculty mentor that gets poured into you. Do you get this extra support? So something like that, that's something very intentional, embedded in the way the programmatic is set up and the way that the program in the Holyoke case, it's embedded in the curriculum, right? Just add a little bit more context there. Yeah, no problem. Okay, to open it up to you all, I wanted to provide some space. Any things that came up that you're discussed with your group that were models that you're currently using, something that you're like, yeah, this is really working in my school, or like, no, this is definitely not working at my school. Want to provide some space here for you all to share out a little bit.
I can quickly jump in just to get things started from our group. So one thing we concluded is we need like basically like a 3-day conference to talk about all these things. But one issue was where we have extremely diverse uh, cultures. So how do you create a culturally relevant pedagogy when
Mm,
you have extremely different cultures? Which one are you
yeah,
relevant to? And part of it is just encouraging and fostering the dialogue between those cultures
that's
within the classroom. And another important observation was focusing on the 80/20 perspective that uh, maybe the high return things that can give us 80% back for 20% effort. Not like we're trying to be lazy about things, but everyone's under huge demands, and so we can need to focus on the high return aspects of things.
Oh, yes, thank you for sharing. And that is extremely important, especially in our urban communities, right? Like our urban communities tend to be a huge, diverse pot of students that come in and out. Some students are non-traditional students or adult learners or English as English second language learners. It's just very important to see what is the needs of your community, right? Um, to be able to take that pulse because every it's very intentional with the way you want to do either that embedded guided mentorship or really looking at what resources do you actually have, right? And at your stake, if you are going to do like an STEM application again or renewal, like how can you intentionally put that into your call to get the funding to be intentional with that as well, which goes hand in hand, John, with the the other proposal workshops we have that I think is really important to shout out in that space. Anything else y'all are seeing or hearing? Go ahead, Mohammed.
Okay, so for our group, I discussed like the for our college experience about the student research mentorship, and that's actually takes some time from us to go through organize the process. But after doing that with a very established process for the recruiting students, doing the research, providing them with the resources, putting the student research opportunity, we exclude actually the GPA as a barrier for some of the students. And after doing the research, the students also start to publish their article. And this journey actually make a very good transformation for our students because we have a very good percentage of our students as a low income students. When they get the student research opportunity and the stipend opportunity, they have a game change for them for the applying for a scholarship, for having transfer rate and the retention rate, the graduation rate, even the completion of the course. We found a very good academic progress and also like professional soft skill development for our students. It was very, very good with the data because we have measure our outcomes or the data based on a grant for 5 years, and that's running the research as an infusing research as a pedagogy for the students. And that
Mm.
the significant improvement for our students was very, very good actually. That's what
Wow.
we discussed.
And can you remind me what school you're at
The
or
school
college at?
UCNJ, Union College of Union County, New Jersey. It's a
Beautiful.
community college, 2 years college, but it's HSI institution, and we have a very good percentage of our students with an underrepresented ethnicity, something like that.
Oh, no, thank you so much for sharing. That provides great context. Thank you.
Mm, Thank you.
Is there anyone that has done something that it just was not successful and you're just like, maybe we could rethink this a little differently?
Uh, there's something. Sorry, I probably should have raised my hand. I was just telling our group when we were in there. I spent a few hours like writing a really lengthy reflection on about both of these papers. We're doing I think some new things, but the way we look at it is that this mentorship relationship it kind of depends, right? And it's really difficult to kind of to set up. And the
Mhm.
mentorship cost kind of depends on two active states, right? So you have a state of a student, and then you have the state of the mentor. And if
Mhm.
a mentor is overloaded, which is often the case, and is like hyper time constrained and just everything else, that mentor is going to be very limited in how that's and what kind of students that mentor can work with. And then same with the student. If a student is in a crisis state, that student is going to be, despite like a mentor having like being very great and just like being able to coach and to case manage and all those things. That's going to be still very difficult. And so in the middle, we have kind of a way that we try to uh, we focus on the state that a student's in, and we kind of categorize it into like three ways where we look at like kind of this unstable state or this instability, and then we look at a stable state. And for simplicity, that's a student that's turning in homework and doing well on tests. And so if you're doing those things, we're winning, and you can start research at that point if you're doing that. And then the other one is the thriving state. And so the way that these states are kind of like mapped out, they pair really closely to the was it the CCW or
Mhm.
the wheel that so
Yes.
it's like it was cool reading it because I'm like, oh cool, this like matches like really closely with some of the things that I'm the frameworks that I'm trying to build. But that being said, we have like right now like three experiment. I'm running three experiments. The students have no idea what's going on, and so but of how we plug students in and how we get this mentorship, but also there is a very intentional effort on just in boosting the state into a thriving state, so that
Mhm.
that kind of and then this community mentorship, right, where you're kind of talking about this ecosystem and this and so there's all these people that have this shared kind of mentorship role, but a lot of that load is with our advising team, they're picking up that load of like, all right, how do we keep the machine going? And so they're building projects and starting students, they're practicing labs, and and so we're trying to move with a lot of agility and velocity so that we can kind of facilitate that mentorship partner, that mentorship that happens between the two.
No, I love that because and it kind of goes to like the first, I can't even back up right now, but looking at like the outcome versus like the next step of what the integration, right, of those ecosystems look like. It was one of the first slides that kind of spoke to it. Like, yeah, we're hitting the threshold. They're being academically successful. How do we get them to thriving in your case, right? To the next step to that space. So I love that. Thank you all for sharing. Any other burning ponders that you all want to share? Okay. Yeah, and kind of going into the same like the further conversations of what we were just talking about, and even the Ofa, is that your how to pronounce it? How Ofa was talking about a little bit on um the ecosystem, right? So when you're building this blueprint for an ecosystem and really providing a space for students to get mentored, be mentored, mentor others, and be able to have this ecosystem of full support, you want to be intentional of how you're creating this ecosystem, right? And here's this image of, you have these plants that are growing in this greenhouse. The greenhouse is essentially the structure of your mentorship, right? You're hoping that this greenhouse is going to be stable enough to really foster and cultivate these relationships and these plants and this mentorship through whatever we want to call this little plant in the middle here. It starts creating roots with connections that are formalized through this mentorship, intentional connections that are evolving, whether it's with a faculty member, with themselves, with their peers. There's the co-creation, right? And again, this is in the context of Holyoke here, but the co-creation, making sure that they have a buy-in, whether it's in the syllabus, and really moving away from teacher, knower, students, learners, but really co-creating and co-learning and facilitating together in their mentorship relationships. Having the structure, that intentional structure, either if it's a class or it's an intentional program that you're creating with your scholarships, to create some type of structure that students can abide by or can follow through. And then that deep space of exploration where students are able to explore themselves, community college is a space of learning and growth. And for some folks, this might be a second career or just coming back to school, or adult learner actually getting the first chance to come to school. To really have that dedicated space to create themselves or to really learn from themselves, which speaks a little bit to like that community culture STEM narrative presentation in the Holyoke example or the community culture wheel. But as a result, when we have this good foundation, you can see isolation getting mushed away. You can see the financial stress because of the scholarship get kind of deviated a little bit, right? Where you're able to create this safe greenhouse for your plant or aka your student to really grow and develop and get nourished in this space of comfortability that this ecosystem is being created. And again, as a result, it's a dedicated space for students to really engage in the STEM work they're doing, in the STEM that they want to do, and explicitly acknowledge, like, be aware you have these lived experiences and use those lived experiences as an asset to elevate and continue that conversation for them as they continue to grow and move forward in this area. So, with a couple minutes left, I did want to say thank you all for partaking in the pre-read and really being engaging here in this first research to practice clinic. We do want to hear from you all. We have a feedback from our third party evaluator, but also some of y'all said like this would be great as a like a proactive professional development conference or something. So myself and Dr. Mesa, who is also a co-PI on this project, we're actually looking for research partners to be able to kind of think with you all, create strategy briefs, and really get the work that y'all are doing out there. So if that's something we can help y'all with your research projects or your ideas, if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to reach out to either of us. Dr. Mesa's email is there, and my email is also there for your convenience. And Melissa, if you're able to copy them in the chat, that would be extremely helpful because I know sometimes it's hard to get them from the slides. But we also are really interested in collaborating with you all and writing and getting your work out there on things that are really working for y'all, even conversations of things that didn't really work, but we're shifting in this way. That's really important for our field to get. So I'll keep this up. And I do have a couple minutes if you all have any questions. I will try to pull y'all back up because I can't see y'all again.
Maria, if there aren't any other, well, see if people have questions, but one thing, the Holyoke model, they really built it around this one credit course. From your experience in the literature, is it important to have a convening center of gravity for these type of efforts, or are there other models?
Well, that's a good question. So I think it's a yes and, but a yes but. I think it's important to have a center, whether it's a program, a class, or a person that's consistent. So I do think it's important to have a centerpiece, but it all depends on the context of the community college, right? So let's say we're a rural school. So my lived experience, I was at Madison College when I was an undergrad at one point for a couple courses that I took there. I loved it because at the time it was a growing school, but it was really hard to get to because I was living in downtown. So I was just really in areas of like mentorship and guidance, they always provided like after hours to be able to meet with folks and really gain those relationships. And oh, I forgot what the center was called back then. Um, it'll come back at some point. Um, but they provided space for you to go in. It wasn't really an advisor, it was more of a peer to be able to just kind of talk because I was taking psychology, so STEM related. Um, but it was just really interesting to have that consistent person to see. So I think it's important to have an anchor, whether it's a person, a program, or a class that really makes this successful for students. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can actually see y'all. Here we go. Um, And yeah, literature really does center some type of center in a space. Um, Cohort models tend to be the strongest so far, ways of keeping students where they have a peer-to-peer mentor, because once they get comfortable in the peer-to-peer, have the ability and the confidence to go reach out to faculty because they can do it in groups or they can do it in different spaces that allows that avenue for them to get that self-efficacy, be like, you know what, I can do this and actually reach out to a faculty member. So I think that's the biggest one that I can think of right now based on some of the more recent literature that I have read.
Great. Yeah, that idea of an anchor is really, really helpful.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the question. Well, if there is nothing else, you all can have 3 minutes of your day.
Wait,
Um,
2 minutes. Let me take one
two
of those
minutes.
minutes.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Take one of those
Go,
minutes,
go
John.
for it,
Go
Kathy.
ahead.
Kathy has a.
Oh, just what kind of discussions did you have? Like, because I was just curious, like on the Holyoke model, like what kind of discussions and activities did you do in the seminar to um with the CCW model? Like, I'm just kind of curious, like, like if we wanted to replicate some of those things, like what kind of things did you guys do? So.
Yeah. Yeah. So first, we were the researchers coming in and helping them with it. So we didn't run those. That was Holyoke that did that on their own. We came in, they were a partner of ours, and we came in to make meaning of what's happening. So how they embedded, so they literally, one of the artifacts we used to make meaning of what the experiences was their syllabus. So they were very intentional on sharing how first they talk about understanding what community culture wealth is. Then they do a reflection on it. And then they go through and talk a little bit more of how they can see this in their field. And then they go into the final product, which is the big presentation on how every single one of those areas kind of overlap for them to make meaning of their spaces. But resoundingly, students felt that that was the first time, because they are STEM students, that they were able to really see themselves in the curriculum and make meaning to the connection to STEM. And I'm sure soon to be Dr. Laurel Carpenter, she's the one that runs that space, would love questions about it at Holyoke. I'm sure she would be open to having some dialogue about it.
So they're a member of the CCSN, so we could get some specifics there for you.
Hmm.
And before
Thank
we
you.
run out of clock, I'll
Course.
mention really thank everyone for coming and for your discussion and your interest. And this just shows the extent to which these are important issues. And next month, on April 10th, we address another huge issue, which is co-requisite remediation. And we have an expert in that area, Dan Douglas, who's done a lot of research, and he has a lot of data about different approaches to the remediation issue in co-requisites and how that affects student success in STEM. So we encourage you to keep thinking about mentorship, as Maria has pointed out to us, and reach out to us if you have specific questions. We can connect you with resources, and see you next month for where we blow up a totally another issue of remediation. So thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.